Some places on a map are just places, but others, they're living stories. They're shaped by the sea, by hard times, and by the sheer will of the families who've called them home for generations. Today, we're going to pull up a chair and talk about one of them, Man o' War Cay in the Bahamas, an island whose entire identity was quite literally built in its boatyards. Now, this one phrase, something you'll hear from the folks on Man o' War, it really tells you everything you need to know. It speaks to a community where resilience and art are the same thing, where everything is tied to the craft of boat building. It's a story about making things that last, simple as that, whether they're meant to float on the sea or stand firm on the shore. So to really get a handle on the boats, you have to go back to the beginning of the island itself. And like any good sea story worth its salt, this one kicks off with a shipwreck, a chance meeting, and a single decision that would set the course for this tiny little cay for the next 200 years. All right, let's lay out how this all went down. It starts way back after the American Revolution, with Loyalists looking for a new home. The Archer family is part of that group, and they start a farm on the pretty much empty Man o' War Cay. But then, in 1820, fate rolls the dice. A ship goes down, and a 16-year-old sailor named Benjamin Albury washes up on their shore. The very next year, he marries the farmer's daughter, Eleanor Archer. And just like that, an island dynasty begins. And you see, this marriage, it was so much more than just a love story. It was really the merging of two completely different founding groups of the Bahamas. On one side, you've got Eleanor and her Loyalist family tied to the British crown. On the other, Benjamin, a descendant of the Eleutheran adventurers, fiercely independent Puritans. That unique mix is what created the tough, self-sufficient character that still defines Manora today. And here's the really crucial part. The town you see today didn't just happen by accident. See, Eleanor's father gave the newlyweds the whole 60-acre island as a wedding gift. And Eleanor, who everyone came to know as Mammy Nellie, didn't just let a town spring up willy-nilly. Nope, she carefully planned the whole thing, laid out the roads, set aside land for a church, a school, even the cemetery. She was basically the island's first town planner. And with that solid foundation, Mammy Nellie and her husband, Pappy Ben, they got to work starting a family. And what a family it was. They had 13 children. Think about that. 13 kids who became the very heart of a community that would become world famous for boat building. Those children were the seeds, and from them, a whole forest of maritime expertise was about to grow. All right, let's talk about how that one family's know-how exploded into a golden age of craftsmanship. This was the time when the whole island must have smelled like fresh-cut pine, with the constant sound of hammers ringing in the air. This is when the name Albury became legendary all across the Bahamas. And this just shows you how central that one family became. I mean, look at this. By the 1880s, just a couple of generations after that shipwreck, nearly 3/4 of all the boat builders on Man o' War Cay had the same last name, Albury. They weren't just in the industry, they were the industry. So the Alburys mastered this incredible art of building boats by feel, not by blueprints. It was a skill passed down from father to son. They built everything from little Abaco dinghies to huge schooners. And they used the best local stuff, strong Abaco pine for the boat's ribs and tough Madeira wood for the hull. The skill was so ingrained in them that one of the absolute masters, William Uncle Will Albury, built his first schooner when he was just 14 years old. Can you imagine? And this beautiful ship, the Esperanto, she really represents the peak of that whole wooden boat era. It was the last big vessel that Uncle Will ever built, kind of a final, magnificent statement of his mastery over wood and water. And in a perfect tribute, they later renamed her after him. She became a floating monument to his legacy. But nothing lasts forever. Those forests of Abaco pine and Madeira weren't bottomless. As the timber started getting harder to find, the boat builders of Man o' War had a tough choice to make. Either let the tradition fade away, or adapt. And what they did next was nothing short of genius. Now, even as things were about to change, those old ways held on tight. That deep, intuitive knowledge of how a boat should sit in the water, you just can't get that from a book. That tradition of building by eye, of shaping a hull based on what your father and his father taught you, that was the soul of the whole operation. Yeah, in the end, scarcity forced their hand. By the 1960s, that prized Abaco pine was getting really tough to come by. And so, in 1985, Albury Brothers boats made the official switch. But this wasn't giving up, not at all. It was a really smart move to make sure the Albury Nam would not only survive, but thrive in a whole new era. And the way they did it, oh, it was so brilliant. See, they didn't just start building some generic fiberglass boat. No way. They took their most perfect wooden hull, the one that had all those generations of knowledge built into it, and they used it as the master copy. They literally cast the future in the shape of the past, making a fiberglass mold that carried the very soul of their wooden boats. And the first model to be born from that process? The legendary Albury Brothers 18.5. But the story of man-o-war craftsmanship didn't stop with fiberglass boats. Not even close. That spirit just found new ways to express itself. Those core values, quality, durability, making things by hand that last, they just branched out and started to define the island's economy in all sorts of new and creative ways. And you can really see that DNA of craftsmanship right here. You've still got Albury Brothers boats making some of the most seaworthy fiberglass runabouts you'll ever find. Then you've got Joe Albury, who's still working with wood, but now he's making these perfect collectible little models of the classic dinghies. And then there's Albury's Sail Shop, another family business, turning rugged old sailcloth into these iconic bags. Oh, and that sail shop has a great story. It all started with Norman Albury's wife, Lena. She just couldn't stand to see the leftover scraps from her husband's sailmaking business go to waste, so she started stitching them up into these tough little bags called ditty bags. Well, people loved them. They became so popular that a whole new family business was born, just like that. Another perfect example of the island's resourcefulness. And that deep-rooted resilience, that knowledge of how to build things to stand up to the sea, was put to the absolute test in 2019. Hurricane Dorian. That was a storm for the history books. A monster. But the stories you hear about how those homes, built like ships and bolted to the land, weathered that storm, and how that community just started rebuilding the very next day, it proved that the spirit of man-o-war is every bit as strong as the boats it creates. It leaves you with this one big question, right? In a world where everything is mass-produced and disposable, how does a tiny little island manage to keep a 200-year-old tradition of making things by hand not just alive but thriving? Well, I think they showed us the answer. They didn't lock their history away in a museum. They used it as the foundation for what came next. They proved that true craftsmanship isn't just a relic of the past. It can be a living, breathing part of today.